This episode of The Energy Show is proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.
So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, I'm just a geeky engineer. I never really cared that much about politics or policies, but my attitudes changed dramatically when I started installing solar in California. I realized that regardless of the product, regardless of the engineering, regardless of the installation, regardless of the economics, the policies were really dictating the pace of solar in terms of deployment here in California. And in California, the solar policies were being led by the California Solar and Storage Association. So there's no one on earth better to talk about clean energy policies, in my view, than Bernadette Del Chiaro. She's the executive director of CALSSA. And I still remember the first time I met you during lunch with David Hochschild and Adam Browning. They came over to me and said, you got to really meet this person, Bernadette. I think it might have been at one of the very first SPIs about 20-something years ago. And two things really impressed me. First, I still remember it was a delicious Chinese chicken salad that we had for lunch. And second, Bernadette, you knew more about California solar policies than anyone else. At the time, you were running the Energy and Climate Program at Environment California. Fast forward 20 years, now you're at the helm of CALSSA. It's been 11 years, and you're just terrific. So welcome to the show, Bernadette.
Thanks, Barry. It's so good to be here. Do you think that was the SPI where you cut Lloyd Levine's tie?
It might have been. It definitely wasn't the one where we had the go-go dancers introducing the on-delay products. So, all right. So first, just tell us a little bit about CALSSA, what the organization's about, and what our goals are.
So CALSSA is the California Solar and Storage Association. We are California's oldest and largest clean energy business group, and we are dedicated to supporting the growth of California's distributed solar and storage market. So we're really focused on the state of California and on the distributed customer-sided market. We have about 700 business members, and about half of them are contractors and half are the rest of the industry that goes to support this amazing technology. So it's great to be here and great to represent companies like Cinnamon Solar and founders like Barry Cinnamon.
You know, the people that have been around, been on the board, been members of CALSSA, we love what we're doing, and we, just try and be a little bit successful, and over long term, in my view, that's very successful. So let's go into a little bit geeky policy, but I bumped into a 10-year-old report by the Rocky Mountain Institute a few weeks ago. It's called The Economics of Load Defection. There was another version called The Economics of Grid Defection. The basic premise of this report was there's two ways that the electric grid will evolve. One way is what they call an integrated grid, good net metering, customer and solar and battery resources, residential and commercial, vehicle-to-home capabilities, fair compensation for customer assets who are paying for this and using it, low electric rates, new cooperative business models, and really lowering the cost for electricity for everybody. And the second premise, the second way that this grid's going to evolve is what they called grid defection. No net metering, penalties for customers using their own resources, excess utility spending, high electric rates, and huge utility profits. So I looked at that report and said, God, we're really going down this load defection path. So in your view, why is that happening?
Well, to your opening comments, it's 100% driven by policy here in the state of California, which is being driven exclusively by the myopic, short-term, narrow-minded thinking of our investor-owned utilities, who are thinking exclusively as these resources as competition, and they are just on the attack. And yet, at the same time, they are not able to deliver the product that customers want. And so customers are doing whatever they can to get the energy resources that they want to keep the lights on in their homes and their businesses. So we're heading down that grid defection path. completely unnecessarily, but it is driven by public policy.
And what would it take to change that policy? When we kind of looked at the contributions that are being made to politicians who are establishing these policies, it's incredibly weighted towards utilities and their unions. How can you change that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to pause on the fact that the California's 3 investor-owned utilities alone, if you combine their campaign contributions to Sacramento politicians and the governor, they are the number 1 industry funder of Sacramento, number 1. And you add that, they have a close relationship with their affiliated labor union, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, who is also extremely well-heeled in the capital. And you just they are almost unstoppable. And they are basically writing energy policy in California. It's what's good for PG&E seems to be what Sacramento and San Francisco think is good for the state. We are going to need to wake up to this reality, and the people of California right now are voting with their pocketbooks. They need to get back to voting at the voting machine and get some accountability back in Sacramento and San Francisco.
Yeah, what really caught my eye about this 10-year-old article is exactly what the Rocky Mountain Institute warned us about. We're looking at record utility profits. I think PG&E booked $2.3 or $2.6 billion in the most recent quarter. Mercury News had an article last week that they pointed out that electric rates are 26.9% higher this year than they were at the same time last year. And there's really no end in sight. So I understand what we're going to try and do, but from a home and business standpoint, what can customers, what can electricity users do to avoid some of these repercussions?
Well, number one, customers, whether they're homeowners or businesses or public institutions like schools, should continue to invest in their own on-site energy, especially if they can do it with adding a battery. No matter what, it's a no regrets investment. The utilities have attempted to shove this industry off the cliff, and they've done an amazing job at really harming this industry, but they have not been successful at making us go away. We still have incredible product, incredible value to consumers. And whether we go and continue down the grid defection pathway, or if the state gets its act together and we go down the vision of integrated clean energy resources, installing a technology now, a battery and a solar system, it's going to be integratable if we can open up those doors through policy. And so, number one, people should just keep investing in this technology. It's going to help save them money. It's going to give them greater resilience, and it will help save the planet. It just won't do it as efficiently and as well as if we were going down the grid integration path.
When I look at similar technology changes, most recently when the baby Bell companies got wiped out and there was a telco deregulation, there were 2 groups of companies. There were incumbent carriers and new carriers. And the incumbent carriers, like the utilities, they kind of made the rules. And all these competitive local exchange carriers, they kind of went out of business. But what I see happening here, and it's going to be similar in the phone business, is cell phones came out, new technology came out, wireless came out, and it kind of wiped out the benefits of having all those wires underground. I see the same thing gradually happening. It's an irresistible force of technology making energy cheaper for everybody with a sunny roof, with everybody with a battery, with everybody with a car. And the utilities are spending probably $50 to $100 million in lobbying to protect that monopoly. But at a certain point, and we're getting to that point in California right now, where people are just freaking out about their electric bills.
Yeah, that's right. And the risk there is that the utilities are successful at basically blocking people from going solar. So what they tried to do under the most recent fight, the net metering 3.0 that resulted in the NBT policy, they tried to tax solar panels. They tried to basically do that penalization of, if you have your own energy, we're going to claw back those savings. That money you owe us is the logic. They are still trying to do that today. That is, we defeated the solar tax within the net metering decision that was made by the California Public Utilities Commission in 2022, but it is not totally dead. In fact, it was just proposed this year in the governor's budget, and we had to defeat it again there. They also just passed a high fixed charge at the Public Utilities Commission, which is kind of like a solar tax and different clothing. They're going to continue to go down this path of trying to squash distributed energy resources. And the risk we run as an industry and as a clean energy movement is that we don't recognize that threat and that we don't do everything we can to keep access to self-generation free and clear of penalties and free and clear of utility reaching behind the meter and trying to control it, while at the same time we have to be able to walk and chew gum. We have to defend the right to self-generate and self-store, and then we have to also push for those more forward-looking visions of virtual power plants and integrated resources that are ultimately going to save all ratepayers billions and billions of dollars as we electrify.
And very specifically, what we need to do, whether it's a homeowner or a business or anybody involved in the solar company, is to support organizations like CALSSA that are fighting this fight, because it's an expensive fight. It's not going away. But we're so close to actually continuing to win. It's interesting when you look at what we can do as the utilities basically say, we're going to charge you more and more just to be connected to the grid. I mean, for my house, I'm getting to the point right now where I have a 130 kilowatt hour battery in my vehicle. I can run my house for a week off of that. And as long as I can recharge it with my solar panels, I'm getting pretty close to defecting from the grid. And we have some customers here in Silicon Valley who have two huge vehicles, and money's no object to them, but they are moving towards defecting from the grid. And as cars become available to plug in at your home, everybody who's going to be driving an EV, which is they're going to be ubiquitous soon, will be able to do that. We'll be able to, at the very least, it's called load defection, buy less from the grid. But you'll get to the point where you're going to say, I'm not going to even have the grid, and I'm going to save that $20 or $30 fixed charge every month and give the finger to the utilities.
Yeah. EVs are a game changer. Absolutely.
Yep. Okay. Good high-level discussions. Let's get a bit closer to the earth. How's the California solar industry doing after the end of net metering, because the net billing tariff is not net metering, and while we're still in this relatively high interest rate environment?
Yeah, not great. Latest data for the first 4 months of 2024, our market is down 60% compared to a pre-surge market, so the 2022 market. So we're overall down 60%. We have lost, we estimate about 17,000 jobs, good paying installation jobs throughout the state. We are still seeing the impacts in terms of business losses, really high profile companies going bankrupt, others just simply packing their bags and leaving the state for greener pastures, ironically, Texas and the Carolinas and places that are just now seen as more friendly to solar. Over 50% of companies that we recently surveyed are concerned about their ability to stay in business, even a year after the NBT tariff has taken effect. And most companies feel like the market is going to remain flat at best because of, unfriendly policies at the state level plus high interest rates. So it is ironically a very dark time for the solar industry in California. And I say ironically because, of course, unless you're living under a rock, clean energy is the top of mind, right? We need to get to 100% goals. We need to solve climate change. Everybody is hyper aware of global temperatures being among the highest, right? We were saying earlier. And we have our governor going around the world proclaiming to be a climate change leader. And yet back home, solar businesses, of which, is a technology California literally invented and brought to the world, are struggling just to stay afloat. So it's a very, very dark time and a very confusing time for most people. I think that people haven't gotten their heads wrapped around it.
Yeah. What are some of the things that CALSSA is doing to improve the business climate, improve the profitability of the companies that are still plodding away installing solar and storage?
Yeah. Number one is we are continuing to defend this industry against ongoing attacks. So the utilities aren't happy with what they did through the net metering 3.0 decision. They didn't shove us off a cliff. Our market may be down 60%, but it is still one of the largest markets in the country, even at that. And they're still attacking us. So blocking solar contractors from doing energy storage, levying high fixed charges on customers, declaring that all commercial projects are considered public works. So these myriad attacks that might not seem singularly huge, but in the aggregate together, they are creating more than just headwinds against.
Yeah. No, they're attacking us from every single angle, and I've just been seeing that for, it's really accelerated over the last 6 or 7 years.
So that is sort of priority number one, is stopping that, continuing to block those attacks. And priority number two is energy storage. So what can we do to continue to improve the economics and the availability and the ease of installation of batteries. We're working on, national residential and fire codes to ease that pathway in the years ahead. We're working on virtual power plant policies. We're at the Energy Commission to provide funding for customers and their aggregators to link up and basically to replace the role of traditional power plants on the electric grid by aggregating the resources and using those batteries like a light switch.
Well, I just read it's really working well. I mean, we're suffering through like the second heat wave right now, and over the last few weeks, the temperature was through the roof. But the California grid was stable because there was hundreds of thousands of residential batteries that were kicking in power when we needed it, sometime between 4 and 9 p.m.
The data is amazing if you look at two things. One is California's peak electricity demands have gone down in the past 10 years. The difference between what energy planners expected, which was for peak electricity to go up, and what we actually achieved, you could literally fit our 2 million solar roofs in the difference. So rooftop solar is shaving and flattening peak demand already. And then you add the 100,000 residential batteries and our ability to hopefully double that and quadruple that in the years ahead. And you're making that sunshine work at 7 and 8 and 9 o'clock at night. And we will, if we stay the course, we will be able to shut down those dirty fossil fuel power plants. We'll be able to shut down Diablo Canyon. We'll be able to move toward a true clean energy future while saving everybody billions of dollars of avoided infrastructure costs. The future, the vision is, we could touch it. We already are touching it, but of course we face just these incredible political headwinds.
Well, they're the political headwinds, but when I look at the economics, this is a question that many, many people ask. I see it on Nextdoor all the time. It's like, why is my electric bill so high? Yes, it's high. But the reason why the electric bill is so high is because utilities have pretty much had carte blanche to raise electric rates, and the Public Utilities Commission, which is the ostensible regulator, is not doing a job. But then the question is, why are they raising the rates so fast? They kind of get away with it. And, we talk about these two different business models of power on the roof of the buildings that are using it versus power from local fossil fuel or nuclear plants versus power from distant solar farms where they're hosting batteries. Solar farms are 500,000 miles away. And yes, it's cheaper to build those solar farms on a per watt basis, but by the time you build the transmission lines, which PG&E is looking at spending $100 billion, when I ran through the numbers, over the next 10 years to run the wires through communities, through forests, through, into the cities, just to do that. That is the sole reason why our electricity costs are so high. And these energy planners are saying, we've got to plan for more energy. And the utilities say, we'll do it. And it's going to be a solar farm in the desert, 750 miles away. And it's going to take us 10 years to build that. And we're going to charge $4 million a mile for those wires. Yeah. That's out of control. And it just amazes me that the policymakers or more people in Sacramento don't basically say, hey, this is just like a really ridiculously expensive way to generate electricity. Let's just do it on maybe half of it on the roof of the buildings that use the power.
The utilities have been so effective at basically turning rooftop solar into the scapegoat of blaming rooftop solar for rising rates. They have taken everybody in Sacramento and other opinion leaders in the state, and they have basically lied to them about this idea of a cost shift. And what is so fascinating is if you look at utility spending, which has increased 500% the past couple decades, well above inflation, utility spending is like almost 1-to-1 with utility rate increases. Mm-hmm. So the reason why rates are increasing isn't because there are fewer people paying for the costs of the grid, right? That's the core concept of the quote-unquote cost shift, is these people are defecting and not paying their fair share. The reason why rates are increasing and have increased meteorically is because utility spending has increased. But here's the big reveal. Utility spending has increased at the exact same time that peak electricity demand has dropped. What are they spending that money on? There's no accountability. There's nobody that says, show me the receipts. These regulators rubber stamp the utility spending plans year after year, And the utilities just say we're going to spend it on X, Y, and Z, and they never say you don't need to do that.
And in some sense, it's getting worse because we're looking at an increase in electricity demand from heat pump conversions, from EVs, and now it's AI, and there's not going to be enough electricity. I see all those press releases, like, boy, the utilities are going to raise, put in even 50% more capacity based on these projections, which may or may not be right. I'd say they're probably on the optimistic side. But there's a much cheaper way to deliver that power. I mean, the best way to do it is every commercial building, every school, every parking lot should have solar panels on it, and that's going to be enough energy collection to basically charge up those vehicles, drive home, and you've got power at night as long as you got some extra solar on your house.
It is
the best
the
way to do
cheapest
it.
way. Yep, it is the cheapest way, and it's the most sure way to keep the lights on. The real threat here in the big picture to what's going on in public policy in California is not just the job losses and the business losses. That is tragic. But the real tragedy is that we are basically setting ourselves up for complete failure. We are not going to be able to charge up those EVs if the grid isn't up and running. And the grid is they're not going to be able to build out those utility scale resources fast enough.
Oh, it's going to be slow. And then people are going to be looking at their electric bill. It's going to be $10,000 a year. It's insane where this is going. Okay, well, let's talk about things from a homeowner's or a business perspective. Bernadette, what are your recommendations for companies or homes that are looking at putting in solar? How should you select a contractor? How should you figure out how many solar panels and batteries and things like that to install?
So my number one recommendation, it sounds simple, but it's really good, is get a couple of bids. Don't just go with the person that knocks on your door. Go with them if you want, but get some other contractors in competing against each other for your business. You're going to find there's a lot of different approaches and styles, and you're going to find the company that you like best. And so that's my number one. Number two is really it's advisable to only work with a company that is a member of CALSSA. I know that sounds self-serving, but the reason is because those companies are the ones that are invested in this industry and are in it for the long haul and recognize that they need to stay informed. We basically provide the industry with the information as well as the policy, defense, and offensive work, but also information to keep everybody informed. And so if you're working with a company that is a member of the trade association, they're most likely going to be well-informed and ready for the job at hand. So those are my two biggest pieces of advice. And from there, consider all the different financing options that are available to you. There's actually a lot of options, and consumers would be best to kind of inform themselves about that.
Yeah, I totally agree about those recommendations. And my recommendation after seeing successful, happy customers and unhappy customers is when you find those contractors, check their references, look at their reviews on Google Reviews or Yelp, call the references, and that'll really kind of put your mind at ease as to whether or not they're going to deliver on their promises.
Right. A good company is more than willing to give you a reference to another happy customer.
Yep. All right, good. All right, so let's dive into a specific question that's coming up a lot because people are looking at these huge electric bills and they put in an EV charger and the rates are 26.9% higher, and now it's really, really hot. So they want to expand their solar systems. How can people expand their old net metering 1 and more commonly net metering 2 systems and still holding on to that valuable net metering rate?
So you could either expand your system only by a little bit, or there's a sort of new pathway, which is you can add what we call a non-exporting sort of parallel system. So you can add a whole lot of solar panels and tie them to 1 or 2 or 3 batteries. And that system operates in parallel to your original system, and it never needs to export. So that battery system basically charges up your car in the day and keeps your home nice and cool in the summer. And it doesn't knock you off of your original net metering status.
Yeah. And since you're using more electricity, it logically makes sense for you to add more panels, and the house is going to use it. And you just use that battery to use it when it makes sense. And what about adding a battery? Some people hear, I have the net metering 2 and I can't change the system. Can they add a battery without going through any complexity or losing their net metering status?
You absolutely can. You should consider adding a battery. You might have to also, upgrade your inverter, of course. And some customers should consider the economics of that for their NEM 2 system or NEM 1. But from a grid reliability and a peace of mind point of view, and also just doing more for the planet, frankly, it's a really good idea to add a battery, and it will not affect your net metering status.
So homeowners and businesses and individuals, how can they participate in the process to implement more climate-friendly policies here, trying to change this utility business model that's just so aggressive and so negative for everybody?
Well, the number one thing you mentioned earlier, if you're in the solar industry, you should be a member of CALSSA. And if you're a member of CALSSA, you should make an additional contribution to give us the resources we need to keep fighting for you. If you're a consumer, whether you're a homeowner or you run a school or a business, you really should consider joining an organization called the Solar Rights Alliance. This is an organization that exists solely for the goal of advocating for you, solar consumer in California. They're a terrific group, and they've got over 100,000 members, and they are a powerhouse, and you can get directly engaged through them in policy fights in the legislature, at the Public Utilities Commission. They kind of break it all down, make it really accessible, and give you a pathway to engage. They do district meetings with their local legislators, bringing in solar consumers, just like you and I, to have a real conversation about the direction California's headed and how we need to get the state back on the path of being a clean energy leader.
Yeah, it's a really good grassroots organization. It doesn't cost a ton of money. I think you can just join without spending anything. But a lot of people just throw money in because it's such a useful organization. All right. So how did you get interested in solar?
I mean, I grew up in Northern California, and I remember reading about the project in Davis. I remember reading about village homes when I was in high school, and that planted a seed of just how cool it is, this idea of generating energy from the sun. And I became interested in this problem of climate change. Mr. Hansen was testifying before Congress in the late 80s, and I was a senior in high school, and I realized then that this was the problem of our generation. And so when I got a job with an environmental nonprofit called Environment California in 2002, I was given the opportunity to just decide, as the head of their clean energy program, what should I spend my time on? Like, what should I advocate for? And so I took some time to kind of survey the landscape. And interestingly, in 2002, most nonprofit environmental advocacy groups that did energy were working on wind, they were working on energy efficiency, and they were working on geothermal power. And they were also working on things called bugs, if you remember, backup emergency generators. It's a super wonky problem, but during the Enron scandal and the blackouts, a lot of hospitals and other institutions put in diesel generators to keep the lights on, and it was a real local public health problem. So that's what the community was working on. And I was like, there's this really big technology called solar, and nobody seems to be working on it. Adam and David were the rare exception. They were working on it in San Francisco, but nobody was taking that vision of rooftop solar and applying it to the whole state and doing that in Sacramento. So when Senator Kevin Murray, his office called and said, I'm looking for energy bills. Do you have any ideas? We said, yeah, we have an idea. Let's put solar on every single roof in the state, and we can power a whole economy with the sun. He said, let's do it. And out of that was born the Million Solar Roofs Initiative. And haven't looked back since.
It took the Enron disaster, which was the end of Davis's career. And then Arnold came in, and Arnold said, the Republican said, hey, this is really great. I'm going to run with it. And he and Kevin Murray and a bunch of other people at the time, they really made it happen.
That's right.
And that just kind of kickstarted things. So, all right, that brought you to eventually CALSSA, when I guess President Murray managed to persuade you to join us, and it's been terrific ever since. But let's just take a step aside. What do you do to unwind from the solar coaster?
It's hard to unwind from the solar coaster, to be honest. I love backpacking, I love hiking, I love being up in the mountains. And so that is sort of my number one go-to. Other than that, I'm a mom, so I do whatever I can to hang out with my kids. But mostly this is a kind of an around-the-clock job. I find that the biggest cause of burnout and people is just not getting traction and not being successful. So as long as we're working together as an industry, and even if, the road is really, really rough, we're still winning. They have not gotten us yet. And we have a bright path, and I'm every reason to be bullish about the state. We just have to get the politics turned back around. But that's what keeps me going.
It's your backpacking background. You know, we want to get to the top of the mountain. There might be a landslide or a tree fall over there, and there's a way around it.
Might be
there's
a little
always
steeper
technology,
path, but
and
we'll get there.
people like you and I and so many others, members of CALSSA and all around the country, will get there one way or the other.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, good. Well, that's all the time we have on this week's Energy Show. Thanks, Bernadette, for joining me. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. If you missed any of today's show, you can go to the Energy Show website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcasts.
This episode of The Energy Show was proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.